It is our pleasure to be joined by the host of the GOJO podcast presented by DraftKings. He's making big career moves, people. Mike Golic Jr. is in the house, one of our favorites, man. What's going on?
Fellas, I appreciate the warm welcome here, and I appreciate being asked back now that I have left the mothership here. It's good to know that the bonds of friendship here transcend any sort of platform.
I think you may be back more often after leaving the mothership.
Yeah, let's get to that. I certainly want to talk to you about how we all can solve what is ailing college football right now. But as far as your career, right, how tough was it to leave ESPN? Because when you look at what you're doing, man, radio, calling games, like always doing something, doing the live stream shows, doing college football live, like you had so much going on. What went into the decision to leave ESPN?
Yeah, it was tough, man. And I always, especially when I was talking to, my folks about this, when I was talking to friends of mine, coworkers of mine, my whole thing I kept coming back to is, all right, like in a moment of honest self-reflection here, I am not Dan Le Batard leaving ESPN or my dad or Ryan Russillo, where you had had these people who had been there for a decade plus and had built themselves up so much. I had been fortunate to do pretty well in the 6.5 years that I was there and feel like things were going in a good direction, but it was still early. It's still early enough in my life cycle in this where it was a risk. But for me, it was about what you mentioned kind of, one was a great opportunity, like DraftKings coming along at this time, seeing what they were doing with the guys at the Le Batard show, my dad, Jared Carabas, where they were serious about this. They were serious about getting together a lineup of people to talk about sports, for it to not just be gambling conversation and for it to kind of take that next step into this business. And then it was also saying, all right, this could also be a good opportunity for me to get a little more balance in life here. It's, a 60 to 90 minute pod versus a 4-hour radio show. I'm still going to be involved in college football this fall. That's going to be something that I get to announce coming up here, where that's still going to be a part of what I do and I'm excited about. But
you can break that news on here if you want. That's fine. That's fine.
I'm gonna come back when I can, and I'll break the news on here. We'll do it like that. But no, just I think for me, I'm also 32, single, no kids, so I have a good opportunity to take a calculated risk if I want to right now, to explore this path and to really give it my all, so that I can continue to build towards a point where all right, maybe someday when a family, when all that stuff pops up, I'm ready to absorb it.
Was the grind doing so much and being able to channel a little bit more of that into maybe a little more concise format? Is that something that's been great, or do you like the big open, spending a lot of time doing stuff?
You know what? I think both have their merits. I mean, especially with our backgrounds, like we all know there's no substitute for reps, and especially for the first, this entire beginning portion of my career, getting to do all those things and getting to work that much, invaluable, has made me, I felt like I've gotten so much better through all that. So I wouldn't trade it for the world. At the same time, the cool part about this is, you're right, it is more concentrated, but it also does have a little bit more freedom of movement. So each day we can create something new if we want. There's room for, if I have an idea, to come to my producer, to come to the people at DraftKings and say, hey, how can we go about trying to execute this? And so I think for me creatively also, because we get used to structure of a radio show, structure of calling a football game, this is something that I haven't really done day to day. And so it's exciting to get to think creatively about something in a different way.
How weird is it, or maybe how awkward is it now that you have to book your own guests?
Man, everyone told me, but at the same time, it feels like no one told me. Like I already can feel myself doing and while I grew up on the East Coast, I think going to school at Notre Dame gives me a very Midwestern tinge. And so I always find myself doing the Midwestern thing after I ask people of, if not totally fine, where you just soften the blow immediately. I cannot help it. It just leaks out of me so much.
Oh, has it been more difficult? I know that's kind of it's a weird deal to do that, but is it easier tougher to get the guests that you want?
I think so far we have set the right bar for ourselves, which is, especially early on, my whole thought process with this as we figure it out was less is more. Simplify, and let's get good at the things we need to get good at to start with before we start to build the rest of this house. You know, I've said the metaphor, I don't know how many times I said it on the podcast we released today. We're kind of building the plane while we fly it. And so we need to keep the most important parts running. And so, you know, we've been fortunate also, you know, myself, Brandon Newman, who's my producer and co-host on there, been doing this long enough to forge some of these relationships with people in the media, you know, getting athletes, making sure we're on the right list so that, you know, when someone's got a book coming out or someone's promoting a charity, that we have the contact info to get in touch. That stuff will all come, and those bigger name guests will come. But in the meantime, it's a great opportunity to reconnect and talk with people that we consider friends who also just happen to cover this stuff and potentially play this stuff at a really high level.
Now, I don't know how much of this you can kind of divulge, but did DraftKings like recruit you? Like, what was it, one of the things where you reached out to them? And if you can't answer it, I mean,
it's kind of was a little bit of both, because so at that point I had already obviously been aware of them through what had gone on with the Levitar guys and knowing Stu Gotts really well and a lot of that crew. And then when my dad started doing stuff with them also, because his time with them predates my time. So I had already known, all right, this is kind of how he came to that. These are some of the people. Me and my dad have the same agent. And so those conversations, once my contract with ESPN was coming up towards the end, just started happening organically. You know, they've got great leadership over there. Stacey McCollum, who's the executive vice president of content for DraftKings, was someone who was at ESPN in a variety of roles, the ACC, SEC Network, Longhorn Network, ESPN. And so all that familiarity on both sides kind of just led to it being a natural conversation. And they came with a very compelling offer and opportunity. And that was sort of the rest is history.
You know, the podcasting stuff, it's not new. It's obviously been around for a while now, and I don't know if you can say it's growing in popularity or if it's already kind of where everyone knows about it and everything. But you know, I saw something interesting yesterday. The Jimmy High Roller guy on YouTube, I don't know if you guys know who that is, but he gets like, you know, millions of views on his like 10, 15-minute videos that he puts out on the NBA, and it surpasses what ESPN gets view-wise. Is this where we're headed? I mean, I know there's always going to be a place for like the network stuff and the you know, big radio and ESPN on television, but my goodness, I feel like more and more people, and we've been saying this for a long time, but I think we've hit the critical mass point where more people are getting their information that way rather than the traditional methods.
Yeah, it's sort of the Bo Burnham line. Like, we have a little bit of everything all of the time right now in the way that we consume most everything. And so I think that's sort of the beauty of right now. And you're seeing it reflected not only in what you just described here, where you can go and find a podcast where your favorite person or a group of your favorite people are talking about the thing you like. Because that's really all this is. Like I said, podcasting is sort of the next level of intimacy up from radio, because radio is sort of like what it was watching cable TV, where if I really like a show or a movie and I'm flipping through channels, oh, I find it. It's great. It's right there. It's in the TV guide. It's super easy for me. This is now kind of like Netflix, where I've got to go and make an active choice on this service. It might populate on the main page. It might show up on a chart somewhere and bring me to it. But by and large, I'm hearing about it from somebody else. I know about it because I read about it somewhere, and then I have to go and seek that out. And so there's a level of intimacy that comes now, because people are such savvy listeners, because especially sports fans really know what they want and want more specific content at times tailored to them. So I think that's a big part of it. But obviously, you know, the brick and mortar networks have so much trust built up over time, right? Like, a lot of times people don't even think at this point, if something breaks, your tendency would be to go to Woj, to go to ESPN, to go to what Adam Schefter had. Like, especially when it comes to news and live events. I think those are always going to be places where those places still really matter a lot. And we're seeing, as the media landscape changes, live events are still the lifeblood of all this. The NFL is still like 97 of the top 100 games that we see every year. College football is a juggernaut. And so you're seeing kind of that focus on getting rights, making sure you cover the hell out of those events, and sometimes with different kinds of broadcasts wrapped around them. And then for the rest of it, the content, maybe some of that does become more a la carte the way it is with podcasting.
All right, before we talk some sports, let's hear it. Let's hear the elevator speech for the podcast. Where can people find it? What's going on? Give us the pitch, man.
Yeah, so the podcast, as you guys were so kind to intro, is GOJO. It's myself. I mentioned his name, Brandon Newman. I know if people have heard me give this boilerplate speech before, I apologize. But Brandon Newman, in addition to being my co-host and my producer, is one of my really great friends. He was a teammate of mine at Notre Dame. We were offensive and defensive linemen going against each other in practice every day. He was also in the same major. We wanted to get into this business. And so we laid the foundation together. We were able to go off and do our own thing. He worked at FS1, Barstool, NBC, was a page at the Letterman show. So has lived a lot of lives. And then we're able to come together for this. And the simplest way I put it to people is, we think, like we talked about, we got a lot of really cool, interesting friends that play sports, cover sports, are around this world, that have a lot of really great information, and we just want to introduce more people to them. We want to create a place that's, what I always strived for when I was doing radio, calling games. Like, let's relax it. We don't have to take it that serious. It is sports, as much as we all love it and as much as we all care about it, and just kind of figure out what it is along the way. I said the only promise I'm comfortable making is we're going to try really hard to make something worth your time and worth your listen, and anything beyond that would probably be too much at this point.
Well, couple of Notre Dame guys. Let's talk about the Notre Dame news. I guess it's not news anymore, but Brian Kelly goes to LSU. How shocking of a move was that? Maybe not shocking that he left, but LSU's kind of, that does not seem like the fit for him at all.
No, I think that was the shocking part, because honestly, if you had asked Notre Dame people if they thought Brian Kelly would ever leave, most of them would have probably thought it would have been to USC. That always seemed to be the one that was floated out there. And certainly, just personality type wise might, be a better quote unquote fit, because we all saw the family thing, and we don't normally think of Brian Kelly of the Bayou. So I don't think it was shock, because we had always known this could potentially happen. And when I just looked at it objectively, when I took off the former player cap, the fan cap, I said, all right, this guy accomplished everything you could short of winning a national title at Notre Dame. And the way he was doing things there, he had set it up, won double-digit games 5 years in a row. He had been doing things really well, but with the formula he had, there had been a difficulty getting over that hump and getting to the national championship. And so if you were Brian and you looked at LSU and that offer that came in and said, all right, they're going to upgrade my money, we know what the facilities look like down there, and the last 3 head coaches that have been there have won national championships, he's got to feel pretty good about his chances. And so logically, I could understand where he comes from and how he gets to that decision.
So I feel like there's some similarities with what's happened at OU and with what's happened at Notre Dame, right? Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly move on to what they view as better opportunities. And it seems like a lot of people really love the new head coach, right? So what is your experience with Marcus Freeman been like as a former player? What are you kind of hearing from the people? And I know Tommy Rees is one of your best friends, right? That's still on staff there as the offensive coordinator. So like, what are you hearing about Marcus Freeman since he's taken over as head coach?
The best thing is when the words match the actions, right? And so far, from what I've heard from everybody and what I've gotten to see myself, what you see is what you get. And this is ultimately going to be judged, and it's going to be the same at Oklahoma, by wins and losses, right? Because as much as fan bases might have had hurt feelings, not felt great about how things went, not felt great about, what's transpired after, some quotes that have come out from people involved in this, ultimately there was a lot of success under those coaches that had been there. And if there's not that same level of success with these new coaches there, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow for everyone. But all we can do is go off of what's gone on now. And I'll tell you this, 2 weekends ago, I was back in South Bend. Notre Dame football had what they call the football legacy weekend. They brought back in alumni from the past 40 years of Notre Dame football. I mean, going back to guys from the championship teams in the 70s, and I think even a couple of guys from the 60s might have been in there. It was 300 former players that were back on campus. And this isn't a Brian Kelly thing. This is the first time in my lifetime I have seen or heard of something like this going on back in South Bend, something of this magnitude where the program wrapped an arm around former players and said, hey, come back in. This program is yours. This current team is yours. We want to make sure we put our former players in front of these current teams. There was networking events with the current team members where they got to meet and talk to not just alumni that were in the NFL, but alumni that are doing great things in all facets of life. Got to go to practice, got to visit with the coaching staff, got to be on the field before the spring game. All these things that, listen, in the grand scheme are small things, but you guys know this. To feel like the door is open for you and to feel like this staff cares enough about you to want to include you in a big time recruiting weekend in the spring game and to have you around the players that are hopefully going to be a part of this program. I think that was a pretty powerful opening stanza, or one of many opening stanzas from Marcus Freeman, where we can at least say, all right, you know what? He's doing everything that he possibly can right now. We'll see what the games look like. I want to encourage everyone to exercise patience, but it's setting the table between the energy given to recruiting and the energy given to making sure that everyone still feels welcome in this program, despite a new face being at the helm, is pretty powerful.
It's really similar to what was going on at Oklahoma at the spring game. And I wonder if the same thing. So one of the reasons, at least I theorize, one of the reasons Lincoln Riley left is, you know, with the transition to the SEC, Oklahoma was really going to have to step up their game on, you know, the resources given to the coaching staff and the football program. And Lincoln was having a really hard time securing those, and he leaves. Well, the reality hits the administration that, oh my God, to get the person we want, those demands are going to have to be met. And so far they have been. There's been a big change in some of the stuff that has gone on up there as far as resources, adding coaches, pretty much everything involved, facilities wise, a lot of it. Have you seen the same thing? Because I feel like Notre Dame and Oklahoma both have great traditions. There's a lot of good things going for them, but they also have some built-in roadblocks that some of the other programs out there don't have. Have you seen some of those walls maybe starting to fall down with the new coach?
Yeah, I think that's always going to be a process, right? Because some of the stuff with facilities, those are longer term answers where, all right, you know, you're talking about the funding for new buildings that are going to pop up and having to find the place and spaces to do all that, and things that I believe will eventually happen. Those aren't things that I know, but just understanding that place. You know, Notre Dame just built a new indoor not too long ago. They're not averse to adding things like that. But I think, you know, hearing that criticism coming from Brian back at the university, it's impossible to ignore. And it also comes at a really interesting time because you're weighing on one hand, all right, we understand that as a part of the arms race, making sure the coaching staff has a, you know, big enough salary pool for assistants and, you know, whatever else. I mean, God, we see all over, especially proliferating the SEC, you know, having all the other coaches on staff who aren't coaches and all those different roles. And it's become that on one side, while also now having to figure out where that fits in the new landscape of recruiting with things like NIL coming into play, with the transfer portal being as active as it is, and how you go about trying to manage all of that. And so, yeah, I think there's been a response, but I think it's also right now for Notre Dame and for the football program at this moment, for Marcus Freeman, so much of this is about person-to-person interaction. Marcus Freeman as the head coach has been so actively involved in recruiting every player that's coming to campus now. You hear all about it. Talk to anyone in the building and they're like, this guy's always recruiting. He's always on the phone with someone. He's always just talked to some kid. And it's a level of energy I find admirable. I know the guy's 35, but hell, I'm 32 and I'm tired just hearing about how much he's doing. So I can really appreciate the tempo he set. And I think right now, I think the rest of that stuff will come because, again, this isn't a place that's afraid to spend money. It's just that there's so much happening right now. And I think, again, kind of like I talked about in my own life, simplifying and saying, all right, what can we control most right now? That's making sure every kid that's getting recruited there feels the love from the head guy.
Mike, what did you think about Venables to OU when you saw that?
I was pretty excited in a lot of ways. So obviously Brent Venables is one of those names as an assistant no one ever thought was going to leave Clemson, right? People had been knocking on his door for years, but obviously this place carried a different place in his heart. It certainly felt like the right time in a number of ways. And 30,000 foot looking at this, I was pumped because, man, it just continues to kind of signify the shift of the Big 12 full time into a defensive league. Like, people have been operating on dated software with that for a while and maybe not paying attention to, the Baylors, the West Virginias, all these teams that had come in and, even starting with Iowa State, where the modern spread killing defenses of college football have come from the Big 12. Hell, some of it's made its way to the NFL through teams like the Panthers and others who have taken that. But Brent Venables, who maybe the premier defensive coordinator in the country, coming over to a place in Oklahoma that had been so defined by offense for a while, said, all right, well, you're going to get a guy that cares immensely about this school. You're going to get a guy who is as fiery and intense a competitor as there is in the sport. And then I always think it's interesting because this is what you guys had in Lincoln. You've got a bona fide weapon if he chooses to be involved in the defensive play calling or just his influence in the room week to week. He's a legitimate game changer as a defensive mind. You get some coaches that are more the CEO, the 30,000 foot view, and then you get some that have such a specialty like that. And for him to see the job that he did year after year in creating a decided schematic advantage for Clemson, that's got to be exciting to know it's coming to Norman now.
All right. How about the transfer portal stuff? How about the NIL?
Let's solve problems, boys.
Big time college football stuff going on here. We saw it. Everyone kind of dipped the toe last summer, and we saw some things that was like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be so bad. And boy, did it start building towards the end of the year. We had the Caleb Williams stuff going on with Oklahoma. We know all of those different scenarios, and it feels like it hit the boiling point with the Jordan Addison situation at Pitt whenever he goes into the transfer portal. And was there tampering? Who knows? Maybe someone will get to the bottom of it. But what do you think? A lot of people feel like this is the ruination of college football.
Man, I'm just amazed that a wide receiver deciding that he wants to leave Pitt to go to USC is where we decide the sky is falling. Like, that's such a far-fetched concept. That's the craziest thing. It was funny to me, but I know it's emblematic of a lot more. I don't know. I want to ask you guys this because I always see people talking about this, and you mentioning the ruination of college football with people saying, we've got to fix this. This is a problem. How do we know yet? Like, what happened last year that signified that there was a problem? Alabama and Georgia were the really good teams again. Michigan managed to make the college football playoff in a group of 5 team for the first time. Those didn't look like problems last year. Now, this might be extra work and certainly headaches for head coaches who have never had to deal with this before as directly as they are now. Staffers on the team trying to figure out what they can and can't do. Even players having to manage all of this responsibility. But I look for us as people that cover it and fans of the sport and say, all right, outside of maybe your team, in the case of Pitt like this, getting worse because you might lose a potentially great player in that, which I get sucks. I'm still waiting for someone to show me what about this right now has shown these massive foundation cracks that will ruin college football.
I hear what you're saying. And I think it just makes people uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I really do. When you look at Jordan Addison, like Pitt's losing their star player to wherever, most likely USC, right? I think it's going to take people a while to adjust to college athletes looking out for themselves instead of for the university and the team. And there's going to be an adjustment period. Because when you look at Jordan Addison's situation, right? Lose your QB, lose your OC, lose your wide receivers coach. I mean, it makes a lot of sense he would want to hop in the portal, especially if Keaton Slovis didn't look good in spring. And this is a guy that he's got 1 year to try to ensure that he's the number one wide receiver off the board in the 2023 draft. I know people have a big problem with the tampering part of it, but I've started to think Jordan Addison was doing this, whether he was getting tampered with or not. Like, he's looking out for number one. And I really think the dollar figures that get floated out, that's what causes the strong reaction. Like, when you see $3 million, there are a lot of people that are going, what? It's ridiculous. And I'm kind of with you. I don't think this is going to be the downfall of college football if we keep the same structure in place with NIL and the portal. Like, I think it's just going to take time to adjust to it. I mean, things take time, and this is, I don't know, Ted, this just isn't how it's been. And people will get used to it. Like, they're still going to watch college football. There's a lot of people, oh, I'm done. No, you're not. Stop lying.
Well, I disagree to a certain extent, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I have no problem with the transfer portal. I have no problem with the NIL. I have a problem with the transfer portal and the NIL together. And here's the reason. So, and we haven't seen it yet, so I guess this is still a theory of mine. But I look at Cincinnati, who made the college football playoff. Great football team. Okay. What, they have 9 players drafted? 9 players.
Yep.
If Cincinnati doesn't make the playoff, I don't think that, I mean, they still get players drafted. I'm not going to say that they don't get players drafted, but good things happen to players on good teams. Okay. And we know that Cincinnati, we know that Pitt, we know that these teams, they're not going to be able to afford these massive NIL deals that we see. They're just not going to be able to have that. Maybe for I don't know, 1 or 2 guys, it's just going to be difficult for them to compete. If the current structure, if it stays the same, there's going to be bigger and bigger and bigger deals to compete for these players. If Jordan Addison leaves Pitt, as I think he's going to, Pitt's not going to be nearly as good of a football team. And whenever you're not nearly as good of a football team, you have less guys up for awards, less guys make all conference, less guys get drafted. So I think as we look at it right now, it's like, hey, this is great. These guys in college football are finally getting a piece of the pie, but it's a small handful, and they're going to be the really good players, I think, are going to be plucked from the mid-tier teams, and that is going to hurt the rest of the guys on their team. Just a theory of mine, but that's why, like, if you just have NIL and the transfer portal is there, but there's a year where you have to sit out or whatever they decide on, I think it's way less likely. And you can reward some of those guys for staying. Are they going to get the huge money? No, but you still have NIL where you can share a piece of the pie. If you eliminate the NIL and you have the transfer portal, I'm fine with that, because I don't feel like I think guys are leaving just on the thought that this can help my potential. And they're not being enticed by a bunch of money to leave their, the teammates that they've kind of come in with and grown up with. Just a theory of mine, but I think that there's a chance that could, because you're not going to see as many guys leaving the top tier programs. It happens, but I think the big pluck in the stars is going to come from the places like Pitt, and that's going to really decimate those teams.
Yeah, I'd say this at the same time, though. I think, one, historically, we've always kind of seen some version of this happen, right? Like, I remember years ago, Oregon plucked one of the best FCS quarterbacks from his team, and all this argument got made. No one really gave a damn. Like, we only give a damn up to a certain point, and because this is new and we kind of know some of these teams' names. And two, I think your last point, if we go back and sort of reverse this thing and say, if NIL wasn't in the equation and you just had the one-time transfer, Jordan Addison's probably still in the portal. And Jordan Addison's probably still doing this. And if we were comfortable with him making that decision, then we should be comfortable with it also involving him being able to make a bunch of money, because I really don't think it's his responsibility to get anyone else drafted on that team. It's not. No one else is going to be doing it. And conversely, if he goes out and breaks his leg, or as we saw, I mean, look at the NFL example of this. Look what Baker Mayfield did last year. Anyone lining up to help Baker Mayfield now because he went out there and gave it all for the team? No.
Well, he's getting $18 million guaranteed dollars.
He is, and that's great. But you know what he's not getting? That second contract that all those guys work for, because he wanted to be the team guy and go out there and play hurt. And at the end of the day, no one cares what you do to get there. They do what you do when you get on the field. And so in my mind, I cannot fault these guys for going and making sure they're taking care of themselves and their families first, because everyone's situation's different. You might get some guys like me that didn't have to worry about their family and where they came from. Guys got all different lifestyles there. And so I don't know. I still look at this and say, if we're going to impose any structure, it's got to be about keeping kids safe from bad contracts and things like that. But I think what they've talked about potentially regulating, the transfer windows to a couple times a year. So we know, hey, this is when we got to deal with this stuff. Coaches don't have to be doing the recruiting all year round. Totally get all that. We see that in pro sports all the time. But I think for the rest of it, again, I just look at it and say, Jordan Addison's coaches didn't have to sit a year anywhere. They didn't have to fork over any dough. They left for not better positions. They left for the same jobs. Same offensive coordinator, wide receiver coach, same jobs at opportunities they thought were better. And we didn't do anything to inhibit their progress.
I think that the Justin Ross example is something that people really need to think about, right? If someone is mad that Jordan Addison, who is arguably the best wide receiver in college football, has entered the portal to try to maximize the amount of money he can make in his last college season, just look at Justin Ross. The guy would have been a first-round draft pick after his freshman year. He dominated the college football playoff, just torched Bama in 2018, and he just signed an undrafted free agent deal with the Chiefs. Right? I mean, because of the spinal issue, the foot, like miss an entire year. I'm kind of with you, Golic, where it's like, hey man, if these guys can make their money, make as much money as you can in this small window that you have to capitalize on your athleticism. And I would love for the tampering aspect of things to be reined in somehow. I just don't.
It's impossible.
And that's what you look at. You look at the article that Ross Dellinger just put out from SI, right? Where he says, hey, and he used task force. I love when there's a task force and things.
That's when you know.
But there are new NIL guidelines coming, right? Soon. And basically the NCAA is going to tell schools that if they don't control their boosters and the associated collectives they formed, if those boosters and collectives continue to induce high school recruits or recruit players to jump into the portal to come to their school, then if the boosters keep doing that, then the school they are linked with, even though it's not in an official capacity, right? Like the school that they are helping to steer kids toward is going to get sanctioned.
But how do you do that? Because they have
that's what I'm saying. Like, Ted, I don't know.
That'd be like if the NCAA knocked on my door and asked to see my tax returns. Like what? What? No.
Yeah,
like,
no.
Who's going to give them any information? They have no subpoena power. They don't have anything. If the school is involved, okay, because the school signed up with the NCAA, there's certain things that they have to turn over if NCAA shows up. But these outside entities, they don't have to give the NCAA anything.
And that's what I'm saying, right? The NCAA effectively is trying to tell schools to tell their boosters what they can and can't do with their money after this last year and a half, where they've been pretty much able to do whatever they want with their money. It's Golic. It's just the system is what it is right now. They started it out with very little regulation, and I feel like trying to restrict it, trying to rein it in is just going to lead to a bunch of lawsuits, man.
Well, so I'll say this, like, because you're right. I think the NCAA's ultimately toothed this on this. The Supreme Court kneecapped them. They are done. They're a dead man walking. And so you guys are exactly right. Especially like, this is like if my boss wanted to back in the day tell me, hey, can you ask your mom to not tweet this? Like, you really think I'm going to be able to stop her from doing that? You really think that these schools are going to be able to stop the people that build their buildings from doing this? Like, some of the donors involved in this are like people that, like, you know, would be akin to like the board of trustees at Notre Dame, where these are the people that have been pulling the puppet strings for a while at some of these schools.
Phil Knight at Oregon.
Yes. What are you going to do, NCAA, to Phil Knight? Good luck with that. Good luck with that. And so
they're gonna no longer let Nike sponsor jerseys. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay.
No, it's laughable, but I think any hint of regulation to me would only, and you mentioned that Ross Dellinger article. I thought one of the interesting things in there was some of the states already changing their laws so that contact is no longer illegal between the school and these collectives. So now they can start to wrap their arms, because some of these places you heard are bringing in people that were former CEOs. They're legitimizing this. They're not selling this on the corner anymore. This is legalized marijuana. You walk into a dispensary and it looks like an Apple store. Like, that's what these operations are going to start to resemble. And if the NCAA really wants to come in and flex too hard, what's going to happen is the thing that we've talked about for years now is sort of this like whispered little thing. The Super League's going to happen. 45 to 50 college football teams are going to break away and say, we haven't needed you. We've been ungovernable for a while. College football's fun little secret is no one's really in charge of anything. Maybe television rights holders have some sort of help on that. But if they push too hard, they're just going to look and say, we can probably just do this ourselves and make a bunch more money and not having to worry about you meddling with this. Because I'm sure the schools enjoy this format a lot, because while the control may be a bit of an unnerving thing, they don't got to foot the bill yet. Like, the schools are getting away with this being borderline pay for play without them having to involve themselves or their bottom line in any meaningful way. And I think that day could still be coming, but it is definitely, if they can get a handle on it and have some influence, probably in the school's best interest to have a working relationship with these people and their deep, basically crowd-funded public pockets, instead of them having to come up off their own athletic budget for this.
It's crazy. You know, the NCAA's had, it's like this dictator where all of a sudden the people say, well, we don't have to listen to you if we all don't listen at the same time. And I think a lot of it has just kind of, there's a lot of things that have happened that have really emboldened that. And I think Kansas going to win in a national championship is one of them. With that whole FBI investigation, that whole thing that went down, Kansas just said, no, we're just going to keep doing what we do. We're just going to have our coach continue to coach. And you see what Oklahoma State did. They did everything the NCAA asked. They right there catered to them, bowed down, and they get hit with a postseason ban. And Kansas just turns their nose up and just keeps doing what they do. And I don't know. I do feel like we are on the very front end of the chain reaction, in my opinion. We're not even a year in, and we've seen guys leave their schools and go somewhere else for multi-million-dollar NIL deals. And it's just been a small handful, but there's going to be a lot of players that are going to be sitting there right now saying, I'll tell you what, if I have the year I want to have, I'm going to get paid, and I'm going to get paid here, or I'm going to get paid somewhere else. And I think we're just, this window's closed. This transfer window's closed. I think at the end of next year, if we don't have anything change, it's going to be madness.
The Isaiah Wong holdout is at Miami's pretty good example of where this could be headed. And Ted, and I think Mike and I are kind of on the same side on this thing. It's like, is it that bad if that's what it gets? Like, if the guys are like, hey, man, I'm awesome, pay me.
Well,
no, I don't know if that's the worst thing in the world. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not the worst thing in the world. And I don't think it's going to – college football is always going to be big. People want to watch high-level football. It doesn't matter if it's college or if it's NFL. People are going to watch it. But it does tinker with – there's a lot of people that are huge college football fans but aren't a fan of the NFL because of I don't know, for whatever reason they may have, but the fact that you can go to your school at the stadium at your school where you went, watch a team go out there and accomplish big things of guys that go there, that you feel like you have a tie to those guys. It just changes things whenever we're basically throwing the tradition and, you know, the school stuff out the window, and it just becomes, you know, it becomes pro football. And I think it's probably a lot like most big changes that happen that come up upon you really quickly. There's a big resistance to it at first, but then over time you get used to it. Everyone, you know, becomes okay with the new model. I think there is quite a bit of that going on. And I find it hard to believe that ultimately people are going to stop going to watch their team play because they paid a bunch of money for, you know, the kid from Pitt. I mean, that's not going to happen. But I do think it already is. And I know that there's a difference between the top level schools and the mid-level schools. I just think this creates more separation. There are no this isn't the NFL where you have guidelines, you have a draft, you have a salary cap. There's things that you have to do, and everyone can share their money to where pretty much everyone can afford the same things if you manage your salary cap right. This is not that. This is a handful of teams have access to unlimited amount of money, and the rest have access to almost no money. That's not a very fair system, and not that it's ever been fair. I just think that this creates even a wider chasm.
Well, now because we have to see it, right? Because I would argue that the chasm's always been wide. We've dealt with a college football playoff era where there's basically two good teams every year. Mm-hmm. Like, we never even have competitive semifinal games. As someone who's been on the receiving end of some of those ass kickings, like, it hadn't always gone super well. So I think there's always,
we know the feeling.
Yeah, this is a support group.
I think there's something to be said that it probably separates the top handful of teams from everyone else, but it may tighten the gap between those top handful of teams. Like, if you see what USC's doing, like, maybe someone could make the argument that, you know, those teams that have access to that are going to become a lot closer than they are right now, where you can't just go out and recruit all these guys and hang on to them because you win every year. Now someone can come in and pay for your guys.
Yep, and that part's going to be interesting. So, but like, even leaving aside the competitive balance thing, because I think college football's always been this weird roller coaster of when resources hit particular programs, when some school comes into a donor with a bunch of oil money. You've seen some schools now with young tech donors who have decided to give boatloads of money, and all of a sudden that like, college football's always been this wave of that. But to your point, because really I think the center of the discomfort, whether it is for fans or for people covering the media, like, the unspoken thing feels like, what if this affects the game we love enough to where people stop watching, and now this thing that's helped all of us is suddenly lesser than? And I look at that and say, I can understand what you just described, people being uncomfortable with so much change. I will be stunned if they truly go away from all of this. And if they do, listen, I can't fault people. Like what you like. There's a lot of stuff to watch and do right now. And if this changes enough to where it's not for you anymore, that's great. I always just ask people to pause and ask yourself why. because for most people that are diehard fans of college football we've known the funny money stuff has been going on under the table. We know that underground market for players and all the things that go on there. We know the battle for resources. I mean, hell, how many college game day pieces do we do about that Clemson slide? Like we've known this has been a ridiculous, gaudy show of wealth for so long. Coaching salaries, all of it's bloated. It is too big to fail. And now money just leaked into this one new part. And the only thing I'll say is, if you came to college football solely because you like the fact that the players don't get paid, just explore that for a second. Like, maybe get to know a couple of players, talk to a couple of guys whose families come from hard times, who are trying to keep that group afloat, who are busting their ass in their literal body to try and get to the place where they can make that money. And then tell me how that still seems like something that should be an appealing part of the game, that should be the reason that you go away. The business of college football has already been there. It's a huge part of how we talk about and cover the sport. It has been for a while. Like, that part's not new. It's just new with this one group of people. And if everyone does a little soul searching and just ask, why does that make me so uncomfortable? And if it has to do with that dynamic that, man, I'm not comfortable seeing these guys get more. You hear so many people all the time, the scholarship's enough. The market says that these guys can get more and people were happy to pay it. Like, we don't get to go back on that. I can't justify going back to that old way and saying, no, that's enough, because clearly they are worth more. An open market has said these guys are worth more, and I can't ask them to take less now just so I can enjoy something the way I've always enjoyed it. I don't think that's morally justifiable. And if it changes college football forever, then maybe it shouldn't have survived as long as it did that way, if that's what had to go on as we built the rest of this up around these guys.
Guys, I don't think we solved anything.
No.
That was not helpful for anyone.
I think it's too early to solve anything, honestly.
Can I posit one thing that I think in the early going should be the priority for anyone trying to solve anything? I think as soon as a player commits to a school, there needs to be a plan in place to get those players resources while they are young, to make sure, hey, we can get you access to a lawyer if you need someone to read these contracts. Hey, we can get you access to someone safely vetted that can negotiate these deals if you're looking for that. And I know that's a little more tenuous. There are a lot of rules about that, but finding structured ways to get resources in the hands of young people so we don't see bad contracts signed by these guys, so we don't see adults who are savvier at this taking advantage of kids and having that become an issue. I think the transfer windows are a good start, but I think that needs to be the priority. If these colleges want to live by that mission statement that they are building young men and they are educators and all this stuff, actually do the job in an area that could be super, super important to getting them financial literacy wise started off on the right foot. I think that's got to be a must.
Right. And a lot of schools, I feel like are educating those guys, but not until they get on campus.
Yeah.
And you got guys signing deals, NIL deals with agents or collectives that have exclusivity clauses in them. And you're just like, oh no, what's he doing? So I'm with you. Golic, we could go on forever with you, man. I mean, we really could. I'm fired up for you and what you're doing. Everyone, go check out GOJO, presented by DraftKings. I love you, man. You're the best.
Love you too, buddy. Always a pleasure catching up with you guys. Obviously, as we just talked about, I am now the guest booker. So as we get closer and closer to college football season, keep those phones on loud because your boy will be calling.
Yes, sir. Hey, Big 12 OU, you know we got you, man.